Are we ready for some other exercises? No, I'm just kidding. So the next person that I'm going to invite is someone very close to all of us. Someone will look at certain things every single day. And it's our nature. Mostly, I think, the commercial leaders in the room, especially the revenue guys, they wake up with this. The minute they wake up, what was it? How was my yesterday? How is my today? And how am I going to plan for my future? So, a company that we work very, very closely. So, let me please welcome to the stage Sarah Daignan, the Regional Director for Client Relationships from STR.
Thank you, Satis. I don't think I feel I've ever been teed up quite like that before. When Mona asked me to speak today, she gave me a very clear briefing. The first thing she said was talk about the Middle East in the context of the world. The second thing she said was show the audience something they've never seen before. And the third thing she said was don't surpass 15 minutes. So here goes nothing. Satis teed me up very nicely because I'm going to touch on the past, the present, and the future for this region as it pertains to hotel performance and how it fits into the wider global performance. So let's go back in time. I'm going to do that in three ways. And I'm going to look, first of all, at various different events that have affected this part of the region. So first of all, World Cup. Can you believe we are fast approaching a year later, which is pretty crazy. In some ways, it feels like a very long time ago, and in some ways, it feels like only yesterday. But almost 365 days later. Now, a few things to point out here. Number one was, in absolute terms, Doha achieved about 74% occupancy. But you'll see in that green bubble, it was a 0% increase on the same point in the previous year. That was, though, as the caption indicates, despite the fact that there was 9,000 new rooms that entered a relatively small market. Now we'll see how it stacked up for average rate and for RevPAR also. Now, what about the rest of the region? How did they benefit from performance? If you look at the Abu Dhabis, the Dubais, right through the full suite, the Riyadhs and the Manamas, and let's be fair, it was all to do with average rate. So when you bring a big event like the World Cup to any region in the world, whether it's the Middle East, Europe, or further afield, there is, of course, ancillary benefits to other locations. So it was all about average rate, and it was really only average rate in the early stages, and when we got down to kind of the last 16, things changed. So how did Doha stack up when you look at the world region? And this is various different, let's call them mega events that happened. Doha certainly knocked it out of the ballpark when it comes to average rate. But all things are not equal when you look at these various different locations. Supply varied vastly. Vast differences in supply. Some of you might remember the World Cup back in 2010 in Cape Town. There was a mere 16,000 rooms to sell during World Cup in Cape Town. This is at the point in time that these various different mega events happened. Whilst you'll see there for Beijing Olympics in 2008, there was just shy of 250,000. So very, very diverse host cities and host nations for the various different events that we've seen. So let's look at another big mega event, or maybe not a mega event, but certainly an event that draws lots of demand, pole position F1 cities. Now you'll notice on here for Abu Dhabi, and I've made some very unprofessional scribbles on a little piece of paper here, because of course there's a question mark as to what happened in 2023. And 2023 was a little bit softer than what we've seen in previous years. So preliminary numbers, as per my computer this morning, we had about 86.5% occupancy across the city, which is about 6 percentage points down on same time last year, and a tiny bit on average rate, about 1.5% down on previous years for rate. Nonetheless, we'll see in a couple of slides' time, rate did clear well in excess of $450 US. And we'll compare that to some other locations in a minute. But the reality is, regardless of where Grand Prix take place, they do have very, very strong demand metrics behind them. What's less surprising is the fact that Verstappen won yet again. Jeddah, you'll see there as well, 91%, so well up in the rankings when it comes to occupancy. Singapore, of course, one of the few night races, 82, Montreal, Melbourne, etc. Again, some global contexts. So what does that mean for average rate when you look at Formula One? Well, the average rate, like I said, this year for Abu Dhabi was about $260, but it tends to clear very, very close to that kind of $500 mark. We track sort of the Thursday night, the Friday of qualifying, of the test racing, the Saturday of qualifying, and then, of course, on the Sunday. So it is a really strong driver in the marketplace. And if we look at that occupancy side by side, year over year, needless to say, we're eliminating 2020 and 21 for very good reason. But year over year, it's a consistent, strong demand driver. And that really is irrespective of how exciting or not, as the case was this year, those races are. What is different, though, is the ability to drive rate year over year. So like I said, a tiny bit of softening, about 1.5% for Abu Dhabi. Nothing I don't think to be too worried about. And of course, it's different depending on what submarket you're looking at. So needless to say, Yas Island and Saadiyat did slightly better than the overall picture. If we look at the build then, into the past, so you'll see back the 365 days out. So this time last year, we had the exact same occupancy on the books, 365 days out, as we did this time this year, 6%. So we had a few Formula One stalwarts that were booking maybe year on year as they were checking out or picking up their packages year over year, or indeed maybe some of the sponsors as well. Tiny bit slower then as we got to April, so 18 versus 20, 35 versus 31. But where we saw the lag this year was in the last minute. So in that kind of in the month for the month. So still a very, very, very successful Formula One, but just a slightly different pattern than we've seen in previous years. Now, as we mentioned a few times already, COP28 kicks off tomorrow. I sadly also ship out tomorrow. I'm going the wrong direction tomorrow back to London. And we've learned a lot from previous COPs. So if we look at Glasgow, first of all, this is what happened in Glasgow. And I'm comparing Glasgow and Edinburgh, and I'll do the same when we look at Dubai and Abu Dhabi in just a moment. It was interesting what happened in Glasgow is that Glasgow was full very, very early on. Hold that thought for just a second. And Glasgow maxed out at about 92, 93% occupancy, but Edinburgh wasn't that terribly far behind at about 80% occupancy. Now, if we look at what that meant for average rate, Edinburgh definitely benefited from the average rate side of things. And spoiler alert, much more than a lot of the Edinburgh hotels thought they would. They thought a lot of it would kind of stay in Glasgow. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Glasgow and Edinburgh, they're about 45 miles apart. So it's not a terrible distance to travel. But what was most surprising about the Glasgow and the Edinburgh impact was that a full 11 months out, Glasgow had already committed to 80% of all rooms. So it was all but full, very, very full, very early on. And you'll remember, of course, we were coming out of COVID at that point. There was still a lot of uncertainty around delegations. Were delegations going to travel? Were they not going to travel? How soon in advance were they going to travel? And what happened was you've seen delegations booking very last minute and finding out very, very quickly that Glasgow was full and they had no other option but to go to Edinburgh. And this is what the in advance looked like. This is what our forward data looked like. Full 12 months out, 80%, 9 months, 88%, and we kind of sat a full 6 months out, Glasgow was pretty much full. There's no other way to describe it. And then the lead time for Edinburgh, whilst it was much shorter, that was the next kind of natural place to go if you were looking for accommodation with Glasgow being full. So that was COP a couple of years ago. Sharm was a slightly different situation. So Sharm was obviously last year, much smaller market than the Dubai market, so COP27. And Sharm occupancy topped out at about 71%. And it sat in excess of that 60%, so that kind of two-thirds, somewhere around the two-thirds for the first 2 weeks, and then we see a slowing with average rate sitting in excess of $300 for a full 10-day period. So 302, 305, I think the top was $321. So it generated very, very different results when it came to occupancy, but very, very similar results if you describe 320 and 373 as similar, but certainly over $300 when it came to average rate. Occupancy in a very different place, Sharm a much larger market than in Glasgow. And the trend continues when we talk about supply. Get ready for a sharp intake of breadth when you compare Glasgow to the likes of Dubai. Because Glasgow would quite frankly sit in a very small corner of Dubai. It would probably just about fit on the palm, I would imagine, in terms of number of rooms. Couple of numbers there for Dubai. The second but last is what's open and operating today. And the very last, what will be open, what's currently under construction, has an opening date by year end. So fast approaching in excess of 2 million rooms over the entire COP period. So what about Dubai and Abu Dhabi? This data is a week old. It's just warning alert, first of all, health alert, first of all. Mona was very insistent I submitted my presentation before today. I'm usually the person that rocks in with a USB and says, here you go. So we're about 10 percentage points higher now to what you're seeing for Dubai. So Dubai is just hovering on, not quite at 70% yet, about 68.5%. And Abu Dhabi is a little bit higher as well, about 5 to 6 percentage points higher than what we've seen on Monday of last week. So you'll see, any of you that have the forward data, you'll see a refresh of this in today, actually. So that's the past. What about the present? Let's look at the present just a little bit. So if you look at the present, and we just look at Europe to start, 70% of all rooms have been sold this year. And that's a 9% increase in occupancy compared to last year. But if you compare this back to 2019, we're about 4 percentage points behind where we were in 2019. It's not a like-for-like comparison, of course. New supply has opened in Europe since then. The Middle East is at 60% and a 12% year-on-year increase, and is one of the few regions that has fully recovered occupancy and is now growing, and is also undoubtedly the fastest growing region in the world as it pertains to supply. Average rate, $161 here, $157 in Europe, $158 in North America, and North America is starting to slow. So we are starting to see a small bit of downturn in North America, and we'll likely see that follow through into 2024. Election years tend to be slower performing years, especially in the US. And all things were not equal when it came to recovery. So you'll see the various different locations here, but Dubai, Manama, Doha, and Riyadh collectively sat in the top 3, all recovering occupancy back to 2019 levels very early on when you compare it to other European locations. These are capital cities around the world. Amman there in number 6. And you'll see it took much longer, very few, if any, actually, European markets in the top 10. When it comes to average rate, it was a very similar picture as well. Kuwait featuring now the Maldives, Marrakesh, and as you go further down, Dubai there now in 5th, although interestingly in the same month as occupancy recovered, so May 2021. All things are not equal when it comes to luxury performance here. Everyone talks about Dubai and the huge amount of luxury supply, and that is ever so true, with many of you in the room contributing to that supply. And when we look at the top 10 performers, year-to-date October 2023, luxury segment only, you'll see St. Bartholomew in the Caribbean sits there first, Maldives, Seychelles, and you're going, but Sarah, where's Dubai? Where's the rest of the markets? Where are all the markets in the Middle East? Well, I took the decision to extend it to the top 12, and now you do absolutely see Dubai and Riyadh featuring, and very, very affordable destinations if you're comparing them to some of the island economies. So finally, what about the future? Where are we going next? What's next for us? 5 of the top 10 global pipeline cities are in the Middle East. Let that just sit for a second. 5 of the top 10 global pipeline cities are right here in this region. And you'll see 2 of those in the top 10 are in Saudi Arabia. Now that's pipeline, that's everything that's in planning, final planning, under construction, etc. This is, however, what I call the real story. This is the real story, what's under construction. The likelihood of these rooms coming to fruition, especially in the Middle East, are very, very high. Sometimes you show construction numbers in Europe and there might be a little bit of attrition. Here there's very little attrition. And again, lots in the Middle East, sitting in the top 10. And I've done a little bit of fudge on numbers here, so I apologize for this in advance. But if you eliminate the US and China, you'll see Saudi Arabia makes up 8% of all new supply expected to open across the world, with the UAE at 3%. It's a huge amount of contribution of supply to the world economies. And yes, I've kept out the US and China for good reason. So what are we missing? What could we do with maybe a little bit more of? I've talked a bit about the sporting events, talked a little bit about COP. What we could do more of? I think this lady could certainly drive some demand into the Middle East, if we could get her to come, that is, of course. Beyoncé did visit the Royal Atlantis, of course, for the fantastic opening party. But these are some of the numbers that Taylor Swift, the sole individual by herself, can contribute to cities. And this is the North America tour, her Eras tour across North America this year. Ranging from 0 to in Vegas, so little impact in Vegas. Vegas are very used to having big music stars, right up to a huge lift of 22% in occupancy. But most of this is in rate, so a lot more runaway, and in some cases, over 100% lift in rate when Taylor Swift has come to town. This is what the numbers look like for Singapore, Sydney, and Melbourne 1 week after tickets were released for the Eras Tour, which will continue in February and March. These numbers are now about 10 to 15% higher, but 1 week later, and you'll see the peaks where she's performing, with several more dates announced as we go through 2024. So no matter where the demand is coming from, it doesn't matter. This is what we're forecasting demand to look like. We only forecast in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which you're just seeing the combination there. Demand for Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and I would argue for this region at large in the short term, is here to stay and to continue to grow. And if we look a little bit further out, it's definitely here well into the future. Thank you.